agencies break down at these certain points. Like every time you double, everything breaks.
Running a business in your 20s versus in your 30s, it changes things.
One of my things is like, if you let it become complicated, it becomes complicated. And if you keep it simple, it stays simple. All the VCs went to their portfolio companies and basically said, fire all of your vendors. You need 2.5 years of cash runway. Times are going to be hard. Suck it up.
Welcome back to Unfair Advantage, the show for founders and operators who are trying to build great businesses and great lives at the same time. Today's guest is someone whose honesty has become a bit of a North Star for us watching his journey unfold publicly. Eli Rubel is the CEO of Profit Labs and the operator behind NoBoringDesign and Matter Made. But what makes his story special isn't just the $10 million in agency profits since 2020. It's that he's built all of it while openly wrestling with some of the things every founder feels but doesn't always say out loud. The burnout cycles, the rebuilds, the identity questions. If you follow Eli on LinkedIn, you know his story isn't linear. It's 15 years of staying in the game, a 1.2 million exit, multiple agency cycles, and the decision to rebuild everything around margin, clarity, and time freedom. Eli, we're really glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Melody. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Before we get into any of your really awesome systems and models, I'd actually love to start with you for a moment. When you look back at the version of yourself who was grinding through those early businesses, what made you figure out that you wanted to really be building a healthy, sustainable business as opposed to like a huge enterprise?
Yeah. My early 20s were marked with energy around like wanting to prove myself and this kind of egoic pursuit of, I can do anything. So shoot for the stars and swing big. And I don't know that at that time in my life, was really taking a step back to think about what that life would actually look like, what would be required to, attain that. And I just went headfirst charging into it. And it wasn't until, I probably spent 5 solid years of grinding before I started to imagine another version of life where I was optimized for family and optimized for freedom of time. I actually sat down, a friend of mine, the real backstory is a friend of mine just had gotten her certification from Berkeley, has like an executive coaching program, and she got certified as an executive coach and wanted to practice. And she knew that I was kind of going through it, trying to figure out what I was going to do next after this was, I'd already sold the SaaS business. I'd already bought the e-commerce business, but the e-commerce business was just spinning wheels and wasn't a very successful business. And so I knew I wanted out. Writing was on the wall that, Amazon was going to eat our lunch in the e-commerce space. And so long story short, she was just like, hey, do you want to have a session together? And so I went into her office and she had me whiteboard out like, what does my life look like? And we landed on this concept called the tricycle life, which is simply a vision of me chasing my kids down a tree-lined street at, middle of the day on a Wednesday, just kind of carefree and able to be there with them doing that. And that became my North Star. And that completely reoriented my focus from more egoic driven pursuit of, I want to take a company public, which was my original North Star, to, hey, like, I want the tricycle life.
That's a big and profound shift. Actually, that's quite wonderful. I love that metaphor. And you're living it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so how did you go around building that life for yourself? Did it start at like, okay, now I have to start a company to make my life around that? Or what was the next first step after you realized this?
Yeah, I think and this is almost alluding to what I've become known for in the agency space, which is optimizing for profit. But I think I took a pretty practical approach, which was, okay, if I want freedom of time, essentially, then I also need to have freedom financially. So what does that need to look like? What's the amount that I need to clear each month in order to have that? And the number I came up with was $40,000 a month. Um, and so, I did some back of the napkin, like what's the easiest business model? Essentially, back then, the way I viewed myself as generally lazy, uh, and my superpower was hiring people who are more talented than me. I've shed the kind of, I think the label that I put on myself of being lazy, I've shed over time, but I still hold true to my superpowers, hiring people who are smarter than me to do things that they're great at, and giving them the resources and encouragement to succeed and thrive. Um, so I felt like a service-based business was going to be the easiest. Like, how do I work the least, make the most? Felt like service-based business was right for that. And it also didn't require me, I had just finished investing $700,000 into an e-commerce business, personally, and I didn't want to have a big cash outlay again. So I was looking for something that was basically zero startup costs. Um, so landed on the idea of marketing consulting. Originally, it was never supposed to be an agency. It was just supposed to be, me charging 2,500 bucks a month, 18 clients, done and dusted. Um, and I signed like my first 2 or 3 clients, and very quickly it was like, man, I don't like doing this work. Like I like talking with the founders, but I don't want to do any work the minute we hang up. And I didn't really even like prepping for the calls. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this is probably a good sign that I need to adjust. And so reached out to a buddy of mine, who, like, a work acquaintance who I'd met through the VC portfolio when I was running my SaaS business. He had been a marketer for another portfolio company, and I just always thought really highly of him, and reached out. I was like, hey, would you want to freelance and do some consulting work? He was like, yeah, sounds good. So we gave that a go, and very quickly realized it was a good fit. He quit his job, came over full time, and we ended up hitting that 40K a month run rate within the first, like, 6 to 8 months, or first sometime in the first year. We hit that goal.
Amazing. And then things grew and grew, and you had to figure it out on how you operated as you scaled, right? Um,
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
just that, but within the whole, like, landscape of AI coming on, and then, like, all these technological changes and changes in the market.
totally. Yeah, like, at that point I got addicted to the growth, which was like, this is fun. Let's keep going. We had a pretty tremendous 3-year run before the market fell out on tech, and all of our clients were tech. So we went through this huge crash as a business. And since then, we've been in these cycles of rebuilding and figuring out, it feels like there's always something new every 2 years since that crash, whereas like the crash happened and then we started rebuilding, and then, all of a sudden, like, AI stuff was becoming real. And then we're like, oh shit, how do we exist in this new AI realm? And like pricing changes and just all sorts of stuff. So it's never a dull moment in agency land, that's for sure.
That's for sure. And this was after the tricycle moment?
Yeah, this is all 2022 and beyond.
Okay, very cool. And so let's talk a little bit about, like, how you designed your business around profit. As you mentioned, there were so many changes, so it's a moving target, right? What are some, I guess, I want to call it the lean operator mindset on, like, how do you keep disciplined around this?
Yeah, so I'll speak to my system for Matter Made, but generally it's the same system that I follow for all the agencies I've started. Um, one of my things is, like, if you let it become complicated, it becomes complicated. And if you keep it simple, it stays simple. Obviously, ish, right, put an asterisk next to that. But my method for that is first to start with a profit model. And you can think of a profit model as simply starting with the profit number you're chasing, and then reverse engineering a P&L from there. Of like, okay, what does our P&L need to look like in order for this to become true, from a team structure and labor cost perspective, from a, marketing spend perspective, from a conversion rate perspective, all of these things. And I'd usually break this out into 3 different phases. And by usually, I mean all the time. I still do this today. where we have phase one, which is, I call it like proof of concept phase. And that's usually somewhere between 0 and 15 clients. And at 15 clients, we move into so phase 0 or phase one, phase two, we move into phase two. And then from 15 to, I don't know, 30 or 50 clients, it depends on the business. And the reason why is it depends on the pricing model. So some of my businesses, it's 15 to 50. Others, it could be 15 to 30 if it's a higher price offering. And then phase three, and each of these phases correlates with a different level of growth investment and infrastructure investment. So in the proof of concept phase, you don't need any managers aside from yourself. You don't need really much marketing spend. It's more about hustling to get those first clients. Once you move into phase one, then you can start to, phase two, you can start to invest in actual marketing campaigns. Essentially try to establish channel viability, cost to acquire customer in these channels, and maybe either start to hire some more senior staff or something along those lines. Phase three is where you really begin to invest heavily in leadership, management, doubling down your growth spend where you've already found these channels that work. So that's the back of the napkin thing that I do. I call it the profit model for any business when I'm thinking of starting one.
Mm-hmm.
From there, the way that I like to keep things simple, I love the pod model. If you're running a service-based business and you can make the pod model work, it doesn't work for every service-based business, but I think it does work for most, and specifically digital service-based businesses. But the beauty of Matter Made, Matter Made's had 3 lives so far. We're in V3 right now, but the beauty of Matter Made V1 was that everything was based off of a simple pod model where I knew that when I got a pod to capacity, it required these 4 roles, and and when at full capacity, it would produce X amount of profit. I can't remember what V1 was. I think it was somewhere between like $500,000 to $800,000 in profit when operating at full capacity. And so the beauty there was like, get one pod nearing capacity, start hiring another pod, stamp it out. And what we found was you could get up to 3 pods without any additional management. The minute we tried to cross into 4 pods, everything broke, and we needed to like really start thinking about layers of management and all of these things. But yeah, I mean, thinking about it in this way, it's like it's like Lego blocks where each pod represents a certain amount of profit. You know exactly what goes into each pod. Pretty simple.
100%. That's really interesting. It sounds like you were a bit resistant to have the middle managers in when you were adding the additional pod. What worked in kind of combining and syncing up the 4 pods? And what were the pain points there?
Yeah, I mean, we made some pretty significant investments. It was kind of, I always say, like, in my experience, agencies break down at these certain points, usually when every time you double, everything breaks. So, you can go pretty well up to 15 people without much falling off the rails. And then usually around 15 people is the first time that agency founders kind of experience this, oh shit, like all the systems and processes that got me here aren't going to get me to the next phase. And a lot of the time, the team members who got me here aren't all ready like for that next phase. And then you get to, you fix it all and you think you're good forever. And then you get to 30 people and suddenly things again start to fall apart. And you're like, oh man, we're back to this again. And we peaked somewhere around 40 people at Matter Made, and the things that we had to do at that size, which is when we had these 4 pods, we had to skill up the people on the team. We had to start hiring more senior people. Generally, we had to remove bottom performers more aggressively. We had to bring recruiting in-house so that we could control talent and HR function in-house. I think at that size, people become the biggest problem. Like, we already knew how to deliver a great offering to our clients, and it was really just a matter of keeping the people on the rails and quickly managing people out if they're not performing, and being able to identify that quickly and repeatedly, and then also, keeping our top performers calm enough to not burn out and, lead. So, yeah.
Yeah. People are very, very valuable assets in business. Really interesting hearing this. And you come to this from both the perspective of running an agency, but also a SaaS, right? Can you talk a little bit to the similarities and differences between like how you organize those two types of business structures?
Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, my SaaS company never got beyond uh, like maybe 7 people at our peak. So we never ran into that. It was just a bunch of us in a room, kind of grinding and hustling as 20-year-old kids. We had one adult in the room. We hired a really talented engineer who's probably in his late 20s. So to us, he was like this ancient, you know, wise man. Um, but yeah, we were acquired. Again, you mentioned it earlier. It was like pretty non-glamorous exit. Where the business was bought for $3 million, of which I took home 1.2. Um, and to me, that was an embarrassing exit in the eyes of Silicon Valley, but a hugely life-changing opportunity
Oh,
for me that opened a lot of doors later.
no. I think a lot of founders even aspire to that. And it goes to that whole let's stay bootstrapped narrative, right? You're your own boss, you're designing your own life. That's great. If this episode's hitting for you, go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps more lean teams find their edge, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Talk to us a little bit about Profit Labs and how you've said like it's your cleanest build yet. You'd had all of this experience. Um, can you walk us through your setup there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to think that each agency I start learns from the lessons of the prior one, and improves on them in some way. And it isn't to say that, because I still own my other agencies and you know love them, but there's always something that you can improve on. And so if you think about the challenge with a business like Matter Made, the marketing agency, was always and still to this day is, it's a higher ticket offering, which means you have a lower customer count, which means you have higher customer concentration, which means anytime a client leaves, it's like a huge kick in the gut. It's slower to close new business inherently because it's a higher ticket offering. The pros to that, of course, it's generally a lot higher margin. And so the business potential tends to be higher to pump out profit with a lower headcount in a Mattermade type of business model. But after being burned by the tech collapse at the end of 21 going into 22, I really wanted something that was going to be more durable. And so I totally flip-flop from high ticket, high margin to lower ticket, higher customer base count, so that, you could churn 2 customers in a month or something like that, 3 customers a month. And you'd obviously be paying close attention, like, hey, what's going on here? We need to fix something. But it wouldn't feel like the business was about to fall apart if you lost 3 clients. So it felt a lot more durable. And that was my improvement from Mattermade to NoBoringDesign. The improvement moving from NoBoringDesign to Profit Labs was, reflecting on Mattermade and NoBoringDesign marketing and design offerings. These are always, as much as we hate to admit it, they're always nice to haves when the market really goes south, right? Like, sure, marketers, and rightfully so, will argue that if you cut marketing, like, your growth is going to be choked and eventually you're going to have to come back to it. And I think that is true. However, as we saw in 2022, when all the BCs went to their portfolio companies and basically said, fire all of your vendors, you need 2.5 years of cash runway. Times are going to be hard, suck it up. And overnight, a lot of these, Series A, Series B, Series C startups fired their agencies, or meaningfully cut back on their services. And the same goes for design, right? Like, in a good economy, when everybody's growing, brand is everything. It's like the power of brand, and everybody talks about it. But the minute that the economy shifts, either macro or micro, then all of a sudden it's like, nah, that's a nice to have. Our brand's good enough. Let's focus on fundamentals. So now I can hear the designers out there like, brand is fundamental, and that's true. But
It is.
uh,
It
I
is.
but So yeah, so the overall takeaway there was like I still hadn't fixed this nice to have narrative. Um, so with Profit Labs, that was the main thing I sought to fix was I want an offering that the market could be completely in the gutter and you still don't fire this vendor. And the realization was, okay, what's the category in a P&L that's most sacred? And it's being compliant and being able to file your taxes at the end of the year and having clarity on business metrics and how the business is doing and all of these things in the finance department are very sticky. And at best, a business could cut back on that spend, but they're never going to get rid of it unless they're really small. In which case they can just do it themselves. But any business that's doing, let's say, more than $1 million in revenue, they're not bringing this back in-house unless the business goes out of business. So that was the big aha moment. And so I built Profit Labs essentially to solve all of the pain points that I had experienced as an agency founder, where, working with vendors in the finance sector, like bookkeepers, accountants, fractional CFOs, and most of those folks come from generic SMB, right? They work with your agency. They also work with the bakery shop down the street. And no shade to that, but a lot of the time I would find myself explaining our business model and explaining how everything worked. And I realized there was an opportunity to bring agency specific expertise to this market and also to put it all under one roof. So rather than having a vendor for bookkeeping and then a separate consultant for fractional CFO, just bringing it, and then maybe a ARAP specialist that's helping with,
Mm.
bills, bringing all of that under one roof. So really the positioning now for Profit Labs is we are a fractional finance department for agencies and digital service businesses. And that's where we found some good traction.
Brilliant. That really aligns with your whole profit philosophy, your agency background, and just marries it all together. That's a really interesting also aha moment you mentioned because I think a lot of people when they're starting a business, I'm thinking of the founders out there, for instance, they're looking for those hair on fire problems. And actually maybe another way of thinking about it is how you said, like, what is an absolute most essential kind of business that will never go out of fashion. And it may be unglamorous in the moment, but it is durable. So, yeah, really, really interesting take. Thank you for sharing that. So, with Profit Labs, let's talk a little bit about like your team size and structure now. So, you're running a really lean team, and I'd love to dig in a little bit into your marketing stack, your go to market play at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the business is very new. We launched at the end of Q1, beginning of Q2, I believe. And at the time of launch, I had a small bookkeeping team. Call that 4 people in total. Um, I had my EA helping with everything in between, kind of being the glue. And a fractional CFO freelance on a freelance basis. And that was kind of like our starting lineup. Now we don't look that much different than that. We just now have brought, the fractional CFO is now coming in house, because we have enough business for that. And the accounting team is, I think, 6 people now. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a really simple operating model, I think, at this point. So that's the team. And then and we're planning on bringing tax in as our next move, because I think as someone who has been fortunate enough to have to pay a high tax bill for more than a few years, I know the power of working with really skilled tax professionals. And there's a lot of the tax code is like so thick, and most entrepreneurs totally miss the boat on a lot of more advanced strategies because most CPAs want to fill your stuff out, charge you $1,500 for filing for you, tell you to write some things off and call it a day because it's easy and it's fast and they can play a high volume game. But when you start paying for these tax strategists and tax lawyers to look over your stuff and estate planners. There's a lot of stuff you can do to legally reduce your tax burden in a meaningful way. Like we've saved seven figures a year in some years just through um, tax optimized strategies that are totally above the board. So that's something that I want to bring to our clients as well, because I think that's a powerful way. It's like, if we're optimizing for profit, we should also optimize for keeping that profit, or as much of that profit as
Exactly.
legally keep.
Exactly. And that is something that's more proactive, that if you hire someone in, it's almost too late in the game, right? To take an opportunity.
Totally. I think if you're not meeting with your tax person on a quarterly basis to talk strategy and for them to interrogate you on what's going on in the business and what's going on in your personal life, there's just so much that's being left on the table as far as optimizations is concerned. So that's our next frontier at Profit Labs. We call it a new pillar to our stool that'll be launching in January. So, and then as far as you asked about marketing mix and channels, right now, we're still frankly figuring it out. My current channel mix is cold email, founder brand on LinkedIn, newsletter, and driving paid subscribers to that newsletter. And that is the extent of our mix. A little bit of like channel partnerships, but frankly, I haven't spent enough time to call out a channel yet. So, yeah.
Nice. What about in-person outreach? I find that like going to market now, it's sometimes the easiest way to build trust is when you go meet the businesses in person, especially if they're an SMB and they're literally down the street from you.
Yeah, I think the challenge for me there is twofold. One, if we were targeting local businesses, that would be straightforward enough. To your point, they're right down the street. But because we're targeting businesses that most of the time are fully remote or mostly remote, um, it kind of becomes tricky to have any kind of real
Mhm.
concentration of everybody in one spot. And further, this comes back to me being maybe lazy or
Mhm.
selectively lazy, but I've got two young kids, as we've talked about before, and you have time in the morning when you're getting them, when I'm getting them ready for school, and then a couple of hours in the evening when they're home from school. And so my willingness to trade that time for business growth is essentially zero. Um, and I'm sure the business would grow more quickly if I carved time. There have been years when they were younger, where I would go to conferences, and those were always fruitful. I'd always make new relationships, or nowadays it's more about meeting people that I know from the LinkedIn world in person, and then that tightens the bond there. So I think that was very valuable when I was doing it. But again, my appetite these days is like, I'd rather just try to be as clever as possible without having to go in person, and even at the sacrifice of growth.
Totally, totally. Welcome to your 30s, huh? So, running a business in your 20s versus in your 30s, changes things.
Honestly, I really get it. Like, I remember back when I was playing the VC backed game, there's this whole thing with backing really young founders who are, barely 20 years old or whatever. And it's like the Silicon Valley way. And of course there are older founders too that get the funding, but like, I really didn't fully understand how much more energy, focus, um, and time, frankly, you can put into a business before you have settled down and before you have kids, which isn't to say you can't get a ton of stuff done and be highly effective once you have all of those things, but you just, like, the commitments stack up, and short, sacrifices have to be made somewhere. So yeah, I understand why they do that now.
No, that's totally fair. There's no such thing as work-life balance. It's just about how do you optimize your productivity and still get to see your kids and yeah, create those pockets, moments like you mentioned. Um, I think it's really key. So really cool. Really cool how you're architecting your life, but also helping, businesses improve their profit to have more freedom to do more fun stuff. I think that's the ultimate win-win. Um, I wanted to ask a couple of questions, like for founders back home who are listening to this, who are like really in the grind. Wondering, like, from a profit perspective, like, how much runway should they be looking for, and what's that first profit spreadsheet that they should be planning out?
Explain to me what can you clarify what you mean by profit runway?
Yeah, so, like, revenue runway, sorry, like, profit margins, how much
Mm.
runway should they be comfortable with? Because in the startup world, it's, like, 6 months at a time, and then you mentioned 2.5 years, in other areas, so
Yeah. Um, so there are a couple ways to slice and dice this. When I think about kind of key metrics and what's healthy and what isn't, I I think that, and the reason why I say there's a couple ways to slice and dice this, it's because the these numbers change based on maturity of business. And I don't mean maturity as far as like how skilled or whatever the operators are. It's more so just like truly where are you in your revenue journey and team size. If you're a sub $1 million in revenue, a lot of those businesses, the owner is still doing a large majority of the service delivery. And so it's entirely possible for those businesses to operate at a 70-80% net margin, potentially, it's purely depending on how much time the owner is willing to put into delivering the service. Um, I'd say that there's usually a period of time where agencies will fall into this like healthy, very healthy 50%-ish net margin category, between, call it 750,000 to maybe 1.5 million top line, and 50% net margin. And that's because they're starting to, the margin's starting to slip a little bit because they're starting to hire people to do the work. It's just too much for the owner to do anymore. But they're still not fully, I don't want to say like I'm not saying they're not a real business, because obviously that's a real business, but um, they haven't, the owner hasn't let go fully of delivery. And so the metrics are still skewed in an unrealistic way. Usually once the owner's fully out of service delivery and they're working on the business and not in the business, and that can happen, it just totally depends on the owner's attitude. Like for me, I don't like being involved in any service delivery. With Profit Labs, it's different because I'm really passionate about this particular topic. And so I actually like sitting in on our clients' monthly strategy calls with their fractional CFO, and just weighing in and hearing what they're thinking about and working on. But I wouldn't say that I'm like an essential piece like if I took a month-long vacation, everything would still happen.
Mhm.
So I'd say once a business gets to the point where an owner is now out of the picture as far as in the business delivering, then having gross margin somewhere in the range of 55 to 65% is healthy, and having a net margin somewhere around 35%. And some people have just a really efficient, somewhat productized offering. They're going to be closer to 45%. And some people have a really, commoditized offer in a like labor dense environment, and maybe their net margin is somewhere closer to 25%. But I think the 35% is an easy number to kind of index on. And then once the business starts scaling beyond 3 to 5 million top line, then that's when you start introducing layers of management, and your gross margin might march down closer to 55%. Net margin might march down as well. So it's a moving target, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's a really good breakdown. Because depending on the stage of the business, you're going to have to make different choices, and knowing when to do those is a big part of it all. really. So very cool. Um, yeah, I guess wrapping up shortly, I wanted to finish up with maybe a question on your top like go to market stack, just wearing your agency hat for a moment there. What go to market stack nowadays do you think that every lean team should be running
And
almost
by
on?
go-to-market stack, do you mean like what channels
Yeah,
or?
no, yeah. What channels?
I mean, I think nowadays for an agency founder to not have a founder brand is like that's I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit because it requires a lot of effort, but I think it is low-hanging fruit in terms of winning business and just being known in the industry. Um, so that would be maybe my first one. I still believe in cold email. I think that, it's gotten a lot harder over the years. And frankly, like it ebbs and flows. We'll have many months where it doesn't do anything for us. And then suddenly we'll close, some deals from it. So it's, I joke that cold email is the channel that I'm always on the verge of shutting down. But,
Yeah.
right when I'm about to do that, like something good comes in. Um, and so the cold email I'd say is still out there. Um,
It's like winning the lottery, right? I had a demo the other day and he came out of cold email. It was a really good lead. And he partly wanted to come on the demo just to see like what I was like in real person. I were like
Totally.
founder to founder, what were you using? Like it was so hilarious. Cause every now and then, like you said, someone comes through and it's like it's lucky, it's a bit of a numbers game.
Totally.
You can scale it up if you want, or you can just like leave it ticking away in the background with a little bit of, attention. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a big proponent of founder-led content. It's why I discovered you. I've been following you also since a couple years, back in my agency days. So, yeah, like you're doing great stuff. Eli, where can people find you?
I allegedly am on LinkedIn a fair amount, so feel free to find me on LinkedIn, shoot me a DM there. Or, if you're interested in Profit Labs, you can learn more at profit-labs.co. And the calendar link, go figure, is my calendar link. So you can get some FaceTime and meet me that way too.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for coming on the show, Eli. It was great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Melody. This is fun.